much for coming. I know many of you, and I'm so thrilled to see my students here. I'm Sarah Holloway. I'm on the faculty at the School of International Public Affairs and also the director of the Masters in Nonprofit Management at the School of Professional Studies. I'm going to look at my notes because I don't want to forget anything. Also, these lights are a little intense for me. But we have an incredible panel today to discuss the topic of DEI in philanthropy, or actually the lack of DEI in philanthropy and what we can do about it, moderated by my colleague and friend, Michael Nutter, who is the David N. Dinkins Professor of Professional Practice in Urban and Public Affairs at SIPA, and among many other assets, the 98th Mayor of Philadelphia, and a lifelong public servant. Art Taylor, who is an adjunct at SPS in the nonprofit program, also the president and CEO of the Better Business Bureau, BBB Wise Giving Alliance, which is a charity evaluator, and host of the Heart of Giving podcast. And Darren Walker, president of the Ford Foundation, which, as you all know, is a $16 billion international social justice philanthropy. Darren has written prolifically and spoken on race, inequality, and philanthropy, and how we must do better if we're going to solve society's most pressing social problems. It's an honor to have you three here, and I will turn it over to Mayor Nutter. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you and good afternoon. And Professor Holloway, thank you for putting this together and for asking me to be a part of it. You, I think, know about my two colleagues here and the folks that I'm going to be talking with. This is not an interview, so to speak. But Professor Holloway embedded in her introduction actually part of the first question, which is for Darren, about the fact that, so this is, can philanthropy solve global problems if it is in itself inequitable? It's the foundation and the premise for this afternoon. And so, as Professor Holloway said, you have written prolifically on this topic. What's the challenge as you see it? What's the problem?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's great to see you as always, and really honored and privileged to have this opportunity to be here. The question, I think Professor Holloway said, or the lack of DEI, I don't think there's a lack of DEI in philanthropy. In fact, I think philanthropy as a sector is obsessed with talking about DEI. Mm-hmm. I think there is a lack of internalizing the language and the meaning. I think the challenge that you raise of the contradiction of philanthropy, certainly American philanthropy, being rooted in inequality, and then the very institutions that were created from that inequality being tasked with addressing inequality is a fundamental challenge in our society, and one I am deeply interested in deconstructing. And being comfortable, I think, is important. I think it's hard for philanthropy. It's hard for people, families, family foundations, et cetera, whose wealth have been created to talk about the inequalities in the system that actually create their wealth, right? So it's hard to have a conversation with a young billionaire who the system has worked for about a system that is fundamentally unfair and where there is bias. Right? So the sort of asymmetry there is real and profound and deeply rooted in the history of certainly American philanthropy. Andrew Carnegie's seminal 1889 essay, The Gospel of Wealth, in which he talked about the imperative of men like him and Rockefeller and Morgan and others to give back. I mean, it was Carnegie who introduced this idea of giving back. Mm-hmm. It was because he felt that in his own life, I mean, obviously running this massive steel refinery and the business that he did without any protections around child labor. There was no such thing as OSHA. There was no, I mean, you know, people would fall into the iron pits and die, and too bad. I mean, you know, that's what charity is supposed to do, is to help. And I think he had no problem and understood that inequality was real, but men like Carnegie and Rockefeller had no issue with inequality. They believed actually that inequality and their accreted wealth was because God had given them unique talents and skills that made it possible for them to accrete wealth. And now they needed to give back. And that out of, in Carnegie's, I'm sure, genuine view, and Rockefeller as well, as a matter of their faith, their Christian religious principles, that they needed to give back. Right? And so I was really motivated by something I read that Dr. King wrote in the 1960s around this issue of speaking to philanthropy. And he said the following: philanthropy is commendable, but it should not allow the philanthropist to overlook the economic injustice which makes philanthropy necessary. And so what Dr. King was saying was something else. Carnegie and Rockefeller were focused on outputs. They were focused on what today we would call ESG. They were focused on outputs. What King was saying was, you should be focused on inputs. Right. You should be focused on the inputs that go into your business, that go into your enterprise, that produce the bad outcomes you're trying to solve.
So let me take you a little further on that, and whether it's technically dead and gone billionaires, or you talked about young billionaires, or maybe some that have been, or current, and not to name any names, but I mean, I'm waiting on an Amazon package right now. Let's go further into, these folks have certain business practices, and then they have their own philanthropy. And in many instances, the one does not match with the other.
Often
does that
there's
create
tremendous asymmetry.
Does that create more inequality and a contributor to the problem?
Well, I think there is greater scrutiny today of wealth because inequality is so deeply embedded in our economy and in our cultures. And so I think sometimes what wealthy people are surprised by is that they are not appreciated more for their philanthropy and for all the good they're trying to do. And I think I don't in any way impugn the sincerity of those feelings. But the reality is, if you have an exploitative business, you will be scrutinized, and philanthropy and greenwashing and reputation laundering, or whatever you want to call it, will not be a substitute for an expectation that you're going to run your business more sustainably with social outcomes, not discriminating against people of color, or exploiting women and children, and trafficking of human beings. I mean, all of the things that in the past some businesses engaged in, I think is going to be less tolerated. Well, we can see already, it's less tolerated.
Art Taylor, you just recently issued a report on the donor trust and DEI issues related to charity and philanthropy, and again, taking a look at whether or not philanthropy or charities actually value DEI, and does it play out in their own workplaces?
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just give a shout out to my colleague, Elvia Castro, who put this together. This is the 7th in a series of trust reports that we call them. We like to try to assess the extent to which people trust the nonprofit sector and organizations that they support and benefit from. This particular one, we wanted to focus on how people perceive organizations that are engaging in DEIA activities. That is, whether organizations are rewarded by donors or whether they're penalized in some sense or whether they're somewhere in the middle. And there's one particular stat that kind of jumps out at people right away, and it's that when asked, only 22% of people say that it's really important to their giving decisions that an organization be equitable, diverse, and inclusive. And
22%.
22%, yeah, under 25%. And that is, like many things in this country, a very mixed bag. Because the way we asked that question was, if you were to consider making a donation on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you come out in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Would it be highly important to you, a 10, or would it be maybe not important to you at all, a 1? And what we found was that most people are in the middle. The average score was somewhere around 5.2 or something like that when we asked the question. And so giving, as you know, is a very complex thought process. It's emotional. It is tied to what we've benefited from. It's tied to other connections we may have. If it's a business decision, it may be tied to how well we can profit from those giving decisions. If it's a philanthropy, it may be tied to what they're trying to achieve organizationally. So there are lots of different factors that go into giving decisions. And so it's not, I don't think, so unusual that diversity, equity, and inclusion would be the highest priority for every donor. But I do think it's encouraging that it is a factor for most people. And also, we asked the question this way, too. We asked a separate question this way. We said, you're about to make a decision on making a gift. And how important is it to you that a person like you be in the organization? And so we asked different segments how they felt about that. And what was so interesting to me was that among white people said, only 25% of white people said that they would not support an organization that did not have a white person in it. Now, I know that's a backhanded way of getting at the problem.
Give us that one more time.
Only 25% of white people surveyed said that they would not support an organization that did not have a white person in it, which says to me that 75% of white people would support an organization, or at least consider supporting an organization that didn't have a white person in it. I think that's kind of good news in a backhanded way. So my point is, that first statistic I gave you presents a scenario that is really part of a much more complex process, I think, that people go through when they make a gift.
And I think that part of that too, because I think this is one of the real values that surveys like this serve, is it reveals for us the tremendous variation within the donor community, right? So that covers people who are giving a $10,000 gift or giving a $10 million gift.
Right.
And so an institution that is giving a $10 million gift may have a very different institutional lens and analysis to DEI than a family living in suburban Kansas City wanting to give to the United Way or out of their donor advised fund to their university or whatever. So it's enormously varied. I mean, if you were to take a sliver of that and look at institutional foundations, say the top 100 foundations,
Right.
you'd have a very different answer because almost everyone believes that it would be important. And for some of us, and there's certainly now more than just 2 or 3 of us who started years ago, asking when a proposal is submitted, certainly at Ford, you have to submit responses to a DEI questionnaire, right? So we want to know your board, your staff, management, the population you serve, et cetera, to make some analysis, not fatal if it's not good, but certainly we want to know, and certainly we want to know because in part we raise it with the applicant, and we will say with the applicant, you know, the work you're doing is important, but there is a component of your work that is lacking, and we may give a grant. In fact, I'm familiar now with we had a kerfuffle a few years ago with a very prominent organization, did not have diversity, but the work was important, and we had a conversation with them, an explicit conversation. Your board does not have any people of color, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, they tried, and they couldn't, after a 3-year grant cycle, they couldn't do it. And we did make a decision to terminate that relationship.
All right, I want to go back for a second to the 22%.
Yeah.
So for 22%, there was an importance.
It was highly important.
Highly important. And I don't know if the flip side of that question was asked or if there's other analysis. What were the other 78%?
Well, okay, so some of them, it didn't matter at all. Now, again, it was a continuum. So the continuum said on the 1, if you were a 1, it didn't matter at all.
Right.
If you were a 10, it mattered a lot.
Right.
But again, what I'm pointing out really, Michael, is that for most people, it's a factor.
Factor. Got it.
I would argue the challenge with our study is that there's no historical context for it. If you were to go back 30 years or 40 years, the number might be skewed closer to 1, right? and many people would have said.
And the question wasn't even asked.
And it wasn't even
nobody cared.
It wasn't even, nobody cared. That's exactly right.
Time has worn some people down. Darren, let me go back to you. Nonprofit leadership and the lack of diversity raised the issue with regard to talent. But we also know, and there are studies that indicate that BIPOC-led organizations often receive fewer unrestricted grants and often lesser amounts than other organizations. Can you speak to that particular issue? And again, how do we overcome that?
Well, I think we have to first name and frame the problem, right? So I think for a lot of people, there isn't necessarily a problem. I mean, maybe we need to get a survey on this. I mean, on this question, right? Because I've heard people say, I fundamentally reject the idea that a white person can't lead an organization serving a minority community effectively. And so if what you are asserting is that as a part of effectiveness, excellence, whatever the language is, that the person needs to be a person of color in order for, right? So that is a fundamental issue, just on the talent and leadership question. We can get to the board and the staff, but on the talent and leadership, I think the issue, I agree with that a white leader can lead an organization serving people of color and communities. The issue is that when we systemically have placed barriers to the advancement and the development of talent of color, that what we should be focused on is that, right? And how we assertively, affirmatively are doing that, and then to address the barriers to why then they are not moving into leadership positions. Because I think I am of the view that people closest to the challenge that we're trying to address are most likely to have the solutions, and that leaders who have a lived experience have a perspective that can be materially important to their success and the success of their organizations. Again, this is not creating a binary. I think the challenge is we have had a binary, right? Where most of the people who have been not rising and not have been people of color. And so structurally we need to address that without getting into this thing where a white leader feels like, well, oh, I guess I can't lead people of color because I'm white. That's not the message. The message is what are we doing to help develop leaders of color? And I don't think we have focused on that enough. And I think if we focus on that, we are more likely to get a more diverse leadership cohort in the nonprofit sector.
Can I follow up on that just a little bit? Because I so agree. And you all should listen to my podcast on this. I'm shameless self-promotion, I get that. But the point I wanted to follow up on is that organizations have to have the courage and commitment to do hard work. And by that, I mean, this is where the accountant in me comes out. We've got to look at everything we do inside of organizations and ask the question, are we holding anyone back? What are we doing that could potentially keep someone from fulfilling what they've been here to do? And that's hard work. It's hard work to look at your hiring practices, to look at how you're procuring things, to look at things like how are we conducting meetings? How do we get feedback from people inside of our organizations? How do we reward people for performance? We have to look at all of these systems. Some are written and codified in policies, others are more cultural. But until we do that hard work, we really won't know if we're holding people back. And what makes it even more complicated, I think, is that what might make me comfortable with how an organization is operating may be very different than how it might make someone else feel. And so we have this whole challenge of relativism going on too, right? We're thinking that if I can solve Art's problem, then I'll solve the problem for everyone in the organization, and we may not have. And Darren, your point about we need to define the problem, I don't think we've actually defined it in a way yet that organizations know this is what we need to do. And I think that work has to happen. That work has to be ongoing. And we have to recognize too that we're on a journey. We may not quite get there to satisfy everyone, but we're on this journey. We want to move forward. And it's not easy, so don't get frustrated. You know, if you're an organization and you've embarked on a program to improve your diversity, equity, and inclusion, stay on that program. Don't be dissuaded because one of your employees may have come to you and said, you know, I noticed that there was this microaggression and I want it dealt with. And we haven't worked hard enough on this. We should do more. Don't be frustrated by that. Embrace it. You know, appreciate that feedback and then try to go to the next level. That's what I hope we can do organizationally. And that will, I think, Michael and Darren, get us to that place where we have more leaders rising through the ranks to become leaders of organizations.
But you also put a hard elephant in the room, the issue of unrestricted support, of why the disparity in people of color-led organizations. So the unrestricted support issue is deep and profound in the sector, certainly among larger institutions, which is what I can speak to. I don't profess to be an expert in small family foundations or individual donors. But I think part of it is control. I think, when I came to Ford, we were 80% project support and 20% general operating support. And we're now over 80% general operating support, and most of our grants in that category are multi-year, which I think is also important. But I think it's very hard to get at the issue of equity and the disparity between what are often smaller, grassroots, more community-based, people of color focused and led organizations, which are by definition undercapitalized and frailer and often live with the stress of the communities they serve. I can speak from my own experience. I mean, we're talking about lived experience. I mean, when I was at the Abyssinian Development Corporation, you know, my little office on 138th Street, there were, in the 1990s, you know, there were a lot of poor people on that street. And I just remember like going to a block association meeting, and first, we knew how to get people there. Just have food, and you're going to get, and you can bring your children, you know. And so people will show up. They will be in their church basement for a meeting with the. I mean, and that's good because that was one of my organizing things that I learned early on. But what you also got was the stress of poverty. What you felt collectively was the stress that people were bringing into the room around everything from paying their rent to getting their kids in the right charter school or whatever it is they were trying to do. And that stress is felt in the community. And many of the organizations serving those very communities deal with that same stress. I mean, you know, in spite of the fact that we certainly had the wealth of the church behind us, at the end of the day, we were independent. And I know the stress of making payroll and what that is like. And I find that the divergence, right, when you look at organizations that have endowments, that have boards, that you as a funder have to figure out your mission. And so if you're talking about equity, there's no way you get to equity without dealing with this issue on some level. You can be a think tank. You can just fund think tanks. But if you're focused on poverty, if you're focused on these issues, you have to take up the issue of the inequality in the ecosystem. And you have to do the hard work that goes back to where I started, which says, why is it that we need to control the organizations we fund, right? That's the number one thing when you, I don't think people want to say it publicly, although I've written about it and people seem to agree, a lot of it is control, right? When I remember when I first proposed at Ford that when we were changing our strategy, one program officer said, I didn't come here to, I came here to fund research projects on labor policy. I didn't come here to build the capacity of labor-serving organizations. And I think for me, when we changed and said part of our work is to strengthen the institutions that serve vulnerable people, then that means you got to get into this, right? You can't be saying, you can't say that, and then not hold yourself accountable to say, okay, so what are we doing? And then you get into the really hard conversation with the reproductive rights team and the tension around giving Planned Parenthood, you know, 7-figure grants every year, and giving, you know, the Black and Latino feminist reproductive justice groups in Mississippi and Alabama and these places $50,000. Right, and that tension, you have to surface that and engage in that and resolve it.
Acknowledge it.
Right, and not only acknowledge it, resolve it. You have to have a point of view. I mean, you got to acknowledge first. Right, but you got to acknowledge it, but you have to then have a point of view, and that point of view can be really, you know, when we did our social bond and we announced the arts grants, and there was, you know, so it was a big chunk of grants. It was over $100 million of grants, but you know. The Studio Museum in Harlem got $5 million, and the Whitney got $500,000. Dance Theater of Harlem got $7 million, and New York City Ballet got $500,000. And people were like, and I was like, it's called equity. I mean, that's what equity looks like in an arts portfolio. It's not that we don't. I love Lincoln Center, and I'm on the board of Lincoln Center. But we gave Lincoln Center $1 million and the Apollo $7 million because I know at a Lincoln Center board meeting that $100 million can be raised at one board meeting if people sit down and really say, we're in a crisis. The Apollo cannot do that. And so we have to put that on the table and talk about that without it sounding like, oh, we don't like the major white organization. You know, no, this is not about you. That. This is not saying, you know, we don't like the mainstream organizations. It's not either or. It is not either or. But it does, though, speak to putting concrete action behind the words and then dealing with that. I mean, I think it's been great to see what's happened, just again, drilling down, double clicking on this issue of the arts grants, because after those grants, Mackenzie Scott came in, each one of those grantees in that arts portfolio, she doubled. I mean, so she gave the Student Museum $12 million. I mean, we thought, we were like, wow, we're giving them a lot of money. She was like, I had a meeting with Dan Stewart of Harlem the other day, and they were like, I mean, I remember, you know, in 1992, Dan Stewart of Harlem and Mr. Mitchell, like, couldn't pay the rent. I mean, Mr. Mitchell was like mortgaging his house to keep to pay the dancers, and to sit with the board in a recent meeting, and they're like talking about, as a result of Mackenzie Scott, these things, they actually are putting money in an endowment, which to me, that's what equity looks like.
This is the portion, this is the moment that Professor Holloway has been dreading, which is, as folks who have taken any of my classes know, from time to time I go a little off script. But I mean, but I've been very good. Don't be nervous. Art, you and Darren, top of the game, know your industry, know your business. How'd you get into this?
Oh, that's a fun story.
I know.
So I started out in public accounting. And the firm I went to work for, one of the big 8 accounting firms at the time, they hired 20 of us to come in at the same time. And I happened to be the only black in an office that had 195 professionals. This was in 1980. And so, you know, you go through an orientation period, and then they start sending you out on audits, to do audits of businesses. Except me. I was left in the office, literally, and the others went out, and they were assigned to do audits. And so after a few weeks of this, I went to the HR hiring manager, and I said, you know, what's going on here? Why am I not getting on any jobs? And they said, well, we're working on it. And I said, okay, well, you need to work on it. Finally, they were able to assign me to work on the audit of Opportunities Industrialization Centers of America. The organization founded by Leon Sullivan. If you don't know him, I implore you to Google this man. You have to Google Leon Sullivan.
Philadelphia.
Icon.
All right. And so that was my intro to nonprofits, auditing OIC. Later on, they hired me to be their CFO, and later, the CEO. So at 30 years old, I was the Chief Executive Officer of Opportunities Industrialization Centers of America. And that was my entree to nonprofits. This national job training program that was training millions of people, funded by the Ford Foundation as one of our significant funders. And I couldn't imagine doing anything else. That was what I was here to do. Although I probably could have been a better accountant if I had been given the same opportunity as those folk I started with. So that's how I got into this.
And then the work you're doing now.
The work I'm doing now, after some years, I decided I wanted to change. And I had some friends who I knew that told me about this organization, the BBB Giving Alliance. And they were looking for someone who had experience in business and someone who knew I was a lawyer also. I knew I was an accountant. So the analytical parts of my experience and the nonprofit work made me a great fit for this job. And I've been doing it for the last 21 years and haven't looked back. So it's a great field to be in. But that's how it happened. It was serendipitous, and maybe the result of forces that I couldn't control at the time. And if I had, I probably wouldn't have been in the nonprofit sector. I would have been like my daughter, making millions and millions of dollars in an investment bank or something.
And then she'll take care of you.
And she'll take care of me.
Right. Darren Walker, you're leading one of the largest and one of the best known philanthropic organizations on the planet. But you didn't always do that. You alluded to work, of course, at Abyssinian, but even before that, how did you become Darren Walker?
Well, I absolutely professionally, after law school, came to New York. I knew I wanted to work for, when you grow up poor, one of the things you resolve is that when you are an adult, you will never be poor again.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of us, the sort of trauma of growing up, like with your mother's car being repossessed and eviction notices when you come home from school on the door, leaves an imprint on your head and your psychology. And so I, after law school, came to New York to work at a large law firm at Cleary Gottlieb, Steen and Hamilton, and from there I went to work for a client on the banking side at UBS, where I was for 8 years. And so I was 10 years on Wall Street. It was a great run. I'm happy I did it. I knew, though, that was not what I wanted to do. Sort of working with people who were just really interested in piling up money was not. And so that's how I met Calvin Butts, through my joining the board of a nonprofit in Harlem. And I met Karen Phillips, who was a member of the church and who had really, with him, started the Abyssinian Development Corporation. And I was hired and was chief operating officer. And I think because I went in with a background, I understood transactions. I just didn't. I was used to using the skills of law and investing for rich clients and Lehman Brothers, and to be able to take those skills and use them to build, low-income housing and supermarket on 125th Street and the kinds of things we did was different. And then one day, the foundation president of the foundation that funded Abyssinian called and said, I gave your name to the president of the Rockefeller Foundation. We had lunch and he was talking about needing talent. He was new at that time. And that's how I ended up. I'm not one of these people who said, I want a career in philanthropy. I still don't want a career in philanthropy. What I was excited about was that philanthropy, what I was doing in Harlem, doing, housing, economic development, wealth creation for Black communities. I wanted to do that at a larger scale. And so what a place like Rockefeller afforded was a platform to do that work at scale. And so that's what excited me, and that still is what excites me. What excites me is that if you have these platforms that can be leveraged, and if you have a point of view, even not everyone may agree, but if your trustees agree and your board agrees and you're in alignment on that, then you can do some, I think, impactful things. And so that's basically, why. We were able to do $1 billion social bond in the middle of the pandemic because,
Because you had $1 billion.
Because we had a bunch of more $1 billion. And so the point is, when you get up, when the board and the trustees are like, okay, we are aligned with that vision. We're aligned with their vision, Darren. We understand why. Yes, there's risk, but we need to do this. Right. It's a huge opportunity. My issue is that we just leave too much on the table in philanthropy. That we are risk averse. That we are unwilling to engage in the work that is riskier, and I don't mean political work. I mean work that is simply pushing at some of the root causes of the problems we're trying to solve.
Yeah. The reason I love asking Darren and Art and Darren, folks I get to, fireside chat, moderate panels with all of you, is in both cases here, neither started out where they ended up.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And there are tons of people around like that who you'll run into or you'll see or you'll read about. Oh, they're so popular, they're this, they're that, they're the other thing. They didn't start out doing that, right? Twists and turns, decisions. Both of you have mentioned people and the importance of relationships and connections and the like. And so just to all of you, one of you, many of you in this room are going to run into each other somewhere else down the road, which could then be the turning point, the spark, the inspiration to do something totally different. And you'll be very happy doing that thing.
Yeah.
Back to the task at hand.
That's a good segue.
Two last things. Art, we talked about some of the challenges, your analysis, the work, the reports, the questions. What's going on inside of these organizations as they grapple with these forces from the outside and still trying to do good work? But if you can give us a little bit of insight as to how they're functioning and operating. Darren talked about, fewer restricted grants, lesser donor amount, yet the work continues.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, one of the great findings in this study is that most people, the majority of people, believe that organizations that have diversity, equity, inclusion, and access programs are more trustworthy, they're more effective, they hire better people, they are able to gather more diverse opinions, they're more creative, they are more focused on their missions. So there are a whole host of great benefits that accrue, at least people believe, in organizations that are diverse and inclusive and equitable. So that's great. But what's really, I think, going on inside the organization is more of a question around, how do we live that? How do we make it real? How do we make it so? And so there I go to my general understanding of the country that we live in. And I think that, like all enterprises, nonprofit organizations are dealing with 5 different personas internally and externally to some extent. There's the person who doesn't believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a problem. There's the person who believes it's there and it's a good thing. We want to have problems with diversity because we want to keep our advantage that's accrued from that. Then there are people who see that there is diversity problems, but it's interpersonal. It's not a structural issue, right? It's just, I don't like Darren or Darren doesn't like me. You guys deal with that, but it's not a racial issue that we should deal with on a systemic level. And then the next 2 categories are people who see that it's systemic and it's structural. One person believes that it's too complex to do anything about. And the final person believes that, it's not too complex. We can deal with this and we can do it now. So those are the 5 personas, and there are probably gradations in between in every organization in this country. And so if you're trying to employ a diversity, equity, and inclusion program in your organization, you're dealing with these 5 personas. And you're trying to manage your organization in such a way that you can achieve results while driving people to a better place from an inclusive and diversity standpoint. And I think that creates enormous challenges, but nonprofits, I think, have the best opportunity to get there because we all come together for a common purpose. We all have already agreed when we walk in a door that there's something more important to us than ourselves, or we wouldn't be here. When I joined OIC, I knew that I wasn't going to make what my daughter is making at Goldman Sachs. But I wanted to do it because the work was so important to those communities. And I could see how we were affecting lives of people. And that gave me such a rise that I said, that's what I want to do. I don't care about the money. I don't care about what the sacrifice is to me. Well, to a certain extent. I didn't want to be poor.
Right.
But I knew there were other things I could do, but that's what I wanted to do. So we come to these organizations with a sense of there's something higher than what we are personally about. And I think that higher purpose can also be a galvanizing force on things like equity, diversity, and inclusiveness. And I believe that if we can learn how to have conversations, and Darren, maybe this is something you could fund systemically. How do we have conversations in our organizations so that we can bridge these various personas and make progress? How do we make that person who understand that it's okay, you're not going to lose just because we're going to give everybody a fair shot? And the person who's way over here thinking we're not moving fast enough, but we're getting there. How do we bridge these communities? There's conversations around that organizations have got to learn how to have. And I would submit they don't know how. So that's the challenge. I think that's the hope. And maybe that's the opportunity as well, Mr. Mayor.
I think part of the additional layer of complexity that I find in that, and when I speak to our portfolio of grantee leaders, is that for our generation, that higher calling was about, and therefore we will sacrifice, we will work 15-hour days, we will have a poor quality of life, we will accept poor wages, we will accept low wages. The generation of younger people coming into the sector today do not have that point of view, and they are burdened in ways we were not.
Sure.
I wouldn't know what the idea of paying back money, that a debt to go to college and law school. I mean, I was on scholarship and I had a Pell Grant. I couldn't imagine having $100,000 of debt when I left college. And so saying to someone, you should have a higher calling. And so accept. They're not willing to do that. And I think it's part of the convulsion you're seeing in some parts of the nonprofit sector where, for example, workers are organizing unions. I mean, unions in a nonprofit organization, you've come to help poor people. Your focus should be on helping them. Why are you organizing a union?
Right.
Well, they're organizing a union because they believe that there are a basic set of standards by which they ought to be expected to live and work with dignity. Right. And so they're not going to work 14 hours a day with no overtime.
Right.
I mean, the kinds of things that, I certainly know at Abyssinian, they're not going to, I was able to go and work for $50,000 a year as chief operating officer of a nonprofit. They're not going to do that because they have a higher expectation of quality of life, of the experience of the work in terms of their own emotional and other well-being sort of indicators. And so it's a much more fraught space to try to have that conversation because those personas aren't static. I mean, it is very much vertically and horizontally a challenge to manage. And I find, and there are a number of efforts underway managing, and what I've been focused on more than philanthropy, but in some of the larger nonprofits that are real.
Yeah.
And many of those circumstances, conditions, the change in the mindset happened before the pandemic and now exacerbated by the pandemic.
Well, and in the summer, the murders that
Sure,
happened in the,
yeah.
I mean, the sort of
2020.
racial equity dimension
yeah.
of this came into
Yeah.
it too, because many of the workers
Right.
were people of color and women.
Right.
And so these issues of inequality really manifest across all of these verticals, from museums to social service organizations to environmental organizations, and the leaders and the boards were caught flat-footed,
Right.
saying, wait a minute, like what you and I would say,
Right.
we came here because of the mission.
Right.
There's
Well,
a higher calling.
right,
We're
right.
not like those people at Goldman Sachs and
Right.
UBS
Right.
who say, I mean, I was very clear when I worked at UBS. I was there, my mission
For money.
was to make money. And every February I had a P&L, and there was no there was no romanticizing.
Right.
And there was also no sense of morality
Right.
associated with, a moral calling to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
It was to sell collateralized mortgage obligations to clients as fast as we could.
Yeah. See, the higher calling, though, as admirable as it is, and of course I was in public service and now different kind of public service, but I mean, the higher calling does not take care of the bill at the Whole Foods at 125th Street.
Right.
Right? I mean, when I go to shop, people say, oh, man, thank you so much for your service. Now, your groceries are $238.25. And we loved your service, but could you put a card in that machine? Right? Otherwise, we need to start taking some things off the belt. Darren, let me ask you the last question. We get ready to go to Q&A. You wrote blistering July op-ed in the New York Times. You talked about the vicious cycle that America finds itself in this work. Talk a little more about that, and then give us at least some examples of what philanthropy can do to improve its own track record, and certainly talk about some of the things you're doing that for.
Well, I think that the piece in the 4th of July piece was really about the fraught nature of the public square, and it was written in the context of 4th of July. And I always start 4th of July with Frederick Douglass is
Right.
what does July 4th Independence Day mean to me, a slave? But it was in the context of how fraught the public square is, and our engagement as a society, because of the level of polarization, the kind of toxic nature of our culture, the ways in which we have become meaner, with less grace, and when I was speaking specifically about our leaders, I mean, and how that then creates a currency of people who have license, and how we are unable in this country to hold the complexity of the American narrative. Right. I wrote something a few years ago where I opened with a quote from Thomas Jefferson and then followed with James Baldwin, and I got pilloried because I said, why would you start your letter with Thomas Jefferson? He was a horrible racist, hypocrite, rapist, all of these things. And my point was just simply to say, what Thomas Jefferson wrote to his friend Samuel DuPont was, the work of America is to build a just nation. I specifically want to use Thomas Jefferson to hold him to his words. And to all those Jefferson people, all those people down in Virginia and all the Jefferson, okay, look at the racism in your society. And what did Jefferson say about all the injustice? Now, Jefferson was a hypocrite. Jefferson, all of those things, he was all of those bad things. But he also created a framework for us to address and fix some of the things he and his fellow founders did not have the courage and willingness and morality to do. And I think we're not able to hold both of those narratives. You're either one or the other. You're bad, you're good. And on both sides, just to be clear. I think my point to my brothers and sisters were like, you should, Baldwin is great, quoting Fannie Lou Hamer was great, but you shouldn't. Okay, I can hold Baldwin and Fannie Lou Hamer and Thomas Jefferson in the same essay and about America. Because if it's just one of the, then that's not really the full America.
It's not America.
And how do we, and so what I was seeking to encourage was for us to be willing to be in the square, not in safe spaces, but in open spaces with people who are of goodwill, who are willing to offer grace, who understand that dignity is the objective and justice is the objective. But the rules of the game have to be that we allow the conversation and the discourse. And that's what philanthropy can do is to support efforts to do that, and support the civic engagement work, support the work around justice. I mean, and for us, I have no, we're criticized, whatever, all the time because of the kinds of things we fund. But I don't, our supporting the Legal Defense Fund to sue for suppression of the vote in Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama, to me, that is the greatest form of patriotism. What more patriotic act can there be than to vote? And who would seek to keep Americans from voting? What an unpatriotic act to seek to keep Americans from the polls. Right. So I think Cheryl and Eiffel and the folks, they are the greatest patriots because they are really fighting the patriotic war, the work to ensure that American values, which I am not ceding to somebody else, racial justice is an American value. We have not lived up to it. Right.
But it's still valuable.
But don't tell me, as someone recently wrote in the, the Ford Foundation, with all their social justice left wing, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no. Actually, justice is not a left wing idea. No. Did you read Mr. Jefferson? It is not a left wing idea at all. I can quote you, it's all over our founding documents.
Darren, stop reading the comments.
Oh no! I read the comments. I think it's important. I think it's very important to read the comments. Not because it's maddening, but it's maddening. But it is important because you do get a sense of things, and it can be dispiriting. Yeah. It can be very dispiriting. Yeah. But I think it's because you see where some people are in this country.
No question. No question. Because I'm really good at sticking to the script,
look at you.
Erwin DeLeon is to come and conduct our Q&A.
Yes, so I'm Erwin DeLeon and I serve as the Chief Diversity Officer for the School of Professional Studies and a lecturer in the
Your mic is not on.
So thank you. Oh, there, better? Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, I won't say who I am again. But so it's your turn to ask questions. So we make sure that we have as many questions answered. I ask that you give your name, your affiliation, and question, not commentary, addressed to one person. All right? So why don't we start over here and then let's go this way. All right, we got one over there.
Hi, thank you so much for your time. My name is Noah Tan. I'm from SIPA, and I had a question for Ford Foundation about taking this whole discussion that's been quite America-focused, international, and talking about the structures of inequality of who gets grants internationally, who gets monitored, who gets freedom, which places already have the structure of a nonprofit as a cultural construct and people who don't, but still deserve those grants just as much as others. Please go into that. Thank you so much.
I'm happy to talk about it because as an international foundation, we deal with it a lot. And I was just on a panel during UN Week with President Sirleaf on this very issue. So at two levels, there's a problem that we diagnosed. One is the history of international funding and donor investment in development is a legacy of colonialism. And what that has meant in many of our institutions is are some of those historic practices. I mean, again, and I will look at my own institution, which has absolutely been a product of that system going back to Bretton Woods. You know, we had offices, even just the nomenclature. I mean, today it makes me, you know, we had field offices. So our offices in Africa were field offices. No, I mean, the fact that people didn't get the irony, I mean, it is hard now, but like, it is really amazing to me that we set up, like an American foundation, set up a whole system. And in those field offices, only Americans or Europeans had the professional positions, or certainly could be given the agency to make grants. Right? So there is a whole history of things like that we have addressed structurally within Ford, and who we hired. You know, we've had an office in Brazil for 65 years. I become president, and looking at the history, the head of the office has always been a white American or European. And I say, why don't we have or white Brazilian? And so when I ask the question, why haven't we had an Afro-Brazilian? It's of course because of the structural way in which Brazil is as a country and its educational system. In order to work in a multinational, you have to be able to speak English. Well, anyone who knows the Brazilian education system knows that Afro-Brazilians don't go to schools where they learn a second language. They learn Portuguese. They speak Portuguese, and that's, if you're an elite Brazilian, you go to schools where you learn English or German or whatever. But that's like just one example of the things then that you say, all right, I am sure if we look hard enough, there is an Afro-Brazilian in that country or somewhere in the world who can run the Ford Foundation Brazil, right? And that's all it took, and then we find, lo and behold, this brilliant human rights lawyer who is, Afro-Brazilian, who fits that profile and had to learn English in college, but he's an amazing leader, and he's completely transformed the Ford Foundation in Brazil. Now, that's like a sliver of the larger problem. When you say how organizations, the 501c3 is an American invention, absolutely. And that is why, if you're going to work internationally with grassroots organizations, you have to have mechanisms that protect the integrity of the dollar flow, but that allow you to give grants, or at least to resource networks and organizations and people that may not be 501c3 or 501c3 equivalents. And that's a lot of lawyering, and you spend a lot of money, and which is why a lot of foundations say, wait a minute, we have to spend, $100,000 on legal fees because the IRS requires, so we can't pretend that we're not an American-based organization with American IRS rules about accounting as it relates. And so I'm not going to say to, our Black feminist network, in South Africa, we're gonna not hold you to because we can be liable, right? So I'm not going to pretend that, we're going to make it work for you. We will make it work for you if you make it work for us. We have to work on this together, right? But it is real, and the fact that so much of the international donor funding goes to Washington Beltway bandit organizations and to the groups in London and Geneva is a huge problem. I've written about it, talked about it, done editorials. It's a major problem. And we in our own work have shifted a lot of our grant making. You used to be able to come to New York to get a grant in South Africa. Don't come to New York. We have an office in South Africa headed by a South African woman, and South African staff, go to them. And they will tell you whether or not you can get a grant from Ford Foundation in South Africa. So I think some of it is really pushing out the autonomy in the agency, but also modifying the rules to allow for these varied ways in which, in other settings, really important justice work is going on.
Other questions? Yep.
Hello, my name is Anna Gula, and I'm a part of the nonprofit management program. And my question is actually very related to the international question and also for Mr. Walker here. I'm wondering how can we as Americans be pioneers of diversity, equity, inclusion when we've also been a part of a very oppressive system, and especially trying to preach that internationally is really difficult. So I guess, do you have advice for how we can kind of be pioneers of that mission while also recognizing the history of oppression that Americans have actively participated in?
Sure. I mean, again, I think it goes to our own narratives. What I resist is this narrative that we've just been so bad and it's so horrible that it's irredeemable. That is just so morally, America, we and our policies have been so colonial, so imperialist, that it's just irredeemable. I reject that. I do believe, though, that as you said quite eloquently, we have to internalize that, right? As I said, just the examples I was giving, those little vignettes, we have to internalize what that looked like. And I think people in my position and in the World Bank, wherever it may be, need to name that. Like in the past, we wouldn't name it. No one would, we're working on a project right now with, some pushback, whatever, sort of this global anti-Blackness project, right? That emerged from talking to folks on the ground from Africa to Brazil, to Dalit communities in India, where it became really clear that there just simply is a history of anti-Blackness, right? And so I have an understanding as an African American, but folks in Brazil and Colombia, and in Kerala in India also have a perspective on it that has as its root some of that history you speak of, right? So we need to name that and then engage in a dialogue that says this is systemic and we can't get away from it by doing little charity projects and we need to get at the systemic change. And that's how I think we get at it, but we don't, I'm not an absolutist that it's just so bad, it's so horrible, throw the whole system, out.
Thank you for this very
Super
interesting
great.
talk. My name is Allison. I'm from Colombia, and I'm an Obama scholar visiting Columbia University. My question is, if we're speaking about philanthropy's role in reducing inequality, it's been very clear its contribution, for example, to supporting organizations that are providing goods and services to reduce these inequalities. But this work also requires changing ideas and beliefs and attitudes that we have towards these structural inequalities. So my question, going back to the question of how do we change the rules of the game, is how can we open more opportunities for philanthropy to help organizations that are actually working on these changing of immaterial realities that take a lot of time and cannot show results in a rapid way to be able to apply to grants or this sort of support.
Well, I think you identified, again, where we started this challenge of dealing with the contradiction. Right? One of the things we have seen in this country, and we see it that where philanthropy is supporting, and even individual philanthropists are supporting efforts that are about deconstructing their privilege. Right? I mean, I was just literally I had lunch today with Agnes Gunn, this woman who is a very wealthy, great, amazing American philanthropist. But she is absolutely supporting things that will raise her taxes, will definitely raise her taxes, will mean she probably has less money to give away or to leave in her kids' trust funds or whatever. And there are people like that. I mean, there are people who know that there's something wrong systemically. And so I actually have hope that there are wealthy people who want to use their wealth to actually interrogate the very systems, right? I think your point about the long-term nature and the long horizon of investment in the kinds of organizations is right. And again, we are very far from perfect at the Ford Foundation. But one of the things we have internalized is that it is long-term. It is multi-year. It's not 3-year. And so we have a couple of initiatives. One is called Build, which, we've made, in some cases, up to 10 years of general operating support commitments to certain institutions, because we believe that in various areas, whether it be racial justice or women's rights, et cetera, there are key institutions that without whom there'd be no chance, right? So just again, sticking with like the Legal Defense Fund, the Legal Defense Fund we have funded since the 1960s. And people have said, why do the Ford Foundation, you're such an old legacy foundation. Where's the new cool thing that's what I want to, I don't send me this list of these groups you funded. Well, the Legal Defense Fund, we funded them in 1963, 4, to sue. They were suing the states of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia for voter suppression. 2 years ago, we made a round of grants to the Legal Defense Fund, to other racial justice, to sue the states of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia for voter suppression. Now, it is, to my mind, that is an indication of why institutions matter. So we don't need to fund them for a project. They must exist, because in this democracy, justice, racial justice will be contested. And so you cannot say, oh, let's do a 3-year grant cycle and we'll be out of here, because their work, their core mission in this democracy is contested and will be contested no matter who is president, who's on the Supreme Court. Same with women's issues, right? I mean, it's contested. And so you have got to have NARAL and Planned Parenthood and the Black Women's Network, and all of those organizations must exist. And so if you start with institutions, which is where we do, then I think you get to okay, we take the long range. But what that does, though, just to be clear, because it's not perfect, it means that we're funding fewer organizations. And so a lot of organizations come along and say, well, why aren't you funding me? You've been funding them for all these years. You should be funding us. And it becomes a real internal challenge to reconcile strategy.
I think we have one more. We'll go over here. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Amanda and I'm a SIPA student. I was wondering if you could talk about how to foster nuance or understanding, keeping things in tension. I think that's something that we've lost a lot in our quick digital age. How do we foster it in schools and conversations and the things that we're doing?
And why don't we have both
Yes,
of you?
why don't you answer that?
Yeah. Wow, I think that's a great question. And I think it's vitally important that we can begin to see that we don't live in a binary world. We live in an and world. We do this and we do that. And we do keep things in tension. And there are more dilemmas that really can't be resolved than there are problems that can be solved. And all of you're going to be leading a nonprofit maybe one day, or heading an international organization as you go through SIPA. And you're going to be hired to deal with the dilemmas. You'll have other people who can handle the problems. But I do think that we're at an important time, because there are organizations out there now that are beginning to do what's called bridging work. One of them I happen to be on the board of is a group called Convergence Policy. And what we try to do at Convergence is bring people together who have very different points of view. We bring together those ones I was talking about and those tens and everybody in between. And we pick an issue. It could be gun control, it could be reproductive rights, it could be any number of things. And we put them in a room for a period of months, years and a half maybe. And they just get to know each other first. We don't put the issue on the table, but we get to know each other first. What's important to you? How did you first contract the issue? When was the first time you saw a gun? What was going on in your head when you saw it? And so we're not talking about solving anything just yet. We're just getting to know each other. We're getting more comfortable. We're building trust so that ultimately we can begin to have conversations. If you believe that fundamentally human beings want the same thing, I happen to believe that. We have this Maslow's hierarchy of needs and we all want it fulfilled. Then you should be able to find common ground if you sit and talk and communicate long enough. I know some of our families can't quite get there, but maybe we can get there with people who we don't know as equally as we can with family members. And by having those kinds of dialogues, nuance begins to come out. And we begin to see that what we grew up with may not be as true as what we're seeing now. We now understand that you took that gun on a hunting trip when you were 4 or 5 years old with your dad, and that became your love of guns. You don't have any intention of arming to, do a mass shooting event. And for those people like me who grew up around a lot of gun violence, maybe it's not so bad that people go hunting. I don't want to see any guns, but maybe it's not so bad. So you learn through gathering trust in people that maybe there are solutions that we can come together with that others like us can also begin to adopt over time. Beyond that, I really don't have a lot of answers because there's a lot going against that, as you pointed out. We're living in filter bubbles. Algorithms are feeding us information that we only get one side of, and we don't get to hear, what the other side thinks as much. And I don't quite know necessarily how we deal with that in this digital age. But I do think that the more we can get out of those bubbles, the more we can take a breath and listen to something very divergent than what we actually have heard. Not saying that we have to buy it or believe it or even agree with it, but to hear it and to be willing to try to understand what's behind it. There's your nuance. That, I think, is what's going to be necessary for our country to move forward, because we have a lot of people who disagree on some very fundamental things right now, and I don't think they really understand that if they could just talk to each other and get to know each other, they're a lot closer than where they think they are. So.
Great, Ben.
That's a great question. I knocked it up the
Okay. One more over here. One last question.
Last question. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Said Bazroun. I'm from SIPA. I'm from Saudi Arabia originally, and my question is, so there's a lot of attention currently around the rise of social enterprises. And it's not just here in the United States, but globally. How do you see philanthropy's role is going to play with the coexistence with social enterprises? And are they partners? Or are they a sector that you see as an investment for the future to be, building an area for collaborative that provide access for the process of development? Because they're in a smaller scale, but they're more accessible for the community. For example, I own a social enterprise back home, and I integrated women empowerment into it. And I feel like it's really easier to communicate new ideas of equality through smaller scale than the philanthropy in a bigger scale. Thank you.
Well, charity is not the sole province of social good. There are lots of ways to achieve social good. Believe it or not, corporations produce a lot of social good, and charities can produce, obviously, quite a bit too. But what you're talking about are, I think, in hearing you discuss it, because the subject of social enterprise is a very broad topic. We're going to be talking about it in class today. It's a broad topic. I think you're focusing on maybe micro organizations or people or small businesses that are also doing things that can produce good while also maybe turning a profit at the same time. I believe that's what you're talking about. And so I think that there is certainly opportunity for those types of organizations and enterprises to thrive, number one, and to produce good. I think one of the things we saw during COVID was how many people decided that they were going to especially support their local store rather than go to a big box. Or they were going to go to a restaurant and order out because they couldn't eat in, to make sure that that organization stayed afloat, because it meant something for their experience in that community. And I think that those organizations are also going to be the ones that are invested most in communities. So I do think that they're with us. They're going to be here to stay. We've created structurally in our legal system ways for people to form corporations easily and to form them for multi-purpose, not simply to make money, but they can also have a social good component to their mission. I think that's good for our society. If there's one thing that I would hope for, though, is that we get better at focusing on what the social good is. You can't just say, we're a social enterprise, but there's no social in the enterprise. We've got to make sure that the social part is actually there too. But I think those organizations are here, and I also would love to see more collaboration among all of the sectors as we go to solve problems, because people's problems today are very complex. It's not simply something that we can handle alone if we can just get a person trained for a job. Well, they might need food, or they might need clothing, or they might need better education than we've given them. There may be a lot of things people need to get to the next place. And so I think, and the last point I'll make is, Darren, you talked so eloquently about institutions. And today we see institutions not trusted as much as they have been in the past, right? Institutional trust is down from where it used to be. And so we're seeing more individual actions. We're seeing more social movements, if you would, things that don't necessarily have a corporation or a structure around them. We see entities that are more fluid. We see activists organizing for different things, and that's great because they bring attention to challenges and problems that need to be solved. But ultimately, we need institutions that are going to be there over a long term to solve problems. And I think we've got to marry the activism that we see in society, which is so delicious if you're a person like me who loves change and who wants to see change. But we've got to also marry the opportunities that they have to collaborate with institutions. And we also need to believe that institutions didn't just get bad. They've always been bad. They've always had problems. We just see them now. And we can't let what we see detract so much from understanding the purpose that they serve. So I hope that answers your question.
Art Taylor, Darren Walker. Our host, I don't know where he got to, Erwin DeLeon. Please.
He's behind.
Please recognize our host. And the wonderful person who put all this together, Professor Sarah Holloway.
Is this on? Thank you. This was amazing and one of the best conversations I've heard on this campus in 16 years, honestly. This was incredible and amazing questions from the students. Both Mayor Nutter and Darren have events to go to at 6, and so we're going to let them run away. But thank them so much, and please stay for reception. Students, we have food from, if anyone's been to an event with me, it's from Eat Off Beat, a former student who is a refugee, and actually they've catered the Ford Foundation. A student who graduated and started a catering business where all the chefs are refugees by status, and there is food from their amazing countries, and it's delicious. So please stay for food and drink. And thank you so much. This was incredible. So thank you.